It's hard to ever really have faith in live-action adaptations of celebrated and loved animated works. I've given a lot of grace to a number of new live-action projects because I watched One Piece live-action and I genuinely enjoyed it. I thought it was great. I have a whole video about it if you want to check out my emotions on that. Live-action adaptations of animated works are not something I advocate for, not something I am excited about, but something that I will give a genuine chance to do its own thing and see how its interpretation of a story that I love can be reimagined onto a screen that is more accessible to a wider range of people who wouldn't give that time to an animated show because for some reason a lot of people interpret animation as being directly connected to being childlike. Now, Avatar: The Last Airbender is a unique case where it is an explicitly child-focused show. While it's a show that has a number of mature themes and is something that you can revisit a lot as an adult and find so many things in it, or you can watch as an adult and still find a lot of value in it, its humor and its focus is still geared towards a child audience, while not ever talking down to that child audience, which is what made it so special, right? It's a show that has this love and admiration for it for a reason, for a well-deserved reason. So when it was announced back in, 2018, I think, that they were gonna do this adaptation, I was even more skeptical then because I had never seen a live-action adaptation of an animated work that I actually enjoyed or thought was, worth celebrating. I was skeptical, but I was willing to go along with it because the original creators were involved. And then as things went along, the creators in 2020 left the project. I don't remember which happened first, but I remember the renderings for like Momo and Appa coming out, and I was not in love with them. I don't like the final designs. I don't love them. It feels too realistic, but whatever. I wasn't looking forward to this for years. Like, ever since it was announced, my excitement was at the floor and only got worse and worse and worse as it came along. I've actually been dreading this show coming out because I didn't want to have to deal with the discourse around it. The discourse that is overwhelmingly toxic and hard to deal with. It was such a relief when One Piece live action was good because the whole community was celebrating it, enjoying it, like being like, okay, we have something good that appeals to a wider audience, that gets people involved with something that we care about deeply. That is the absolute ideal. That's the pinnacle. That is what you want. The other side of it here is something like Cowboy Bebop, where it's so bad. It's so unequivocally bad that everyone just goes, okay, this is trash, so we're just gonna all collectively agree to forget this in a couple years, which we thankfully all have. And then comes the very worst thing it could be for any kind of online discourse, which is mediocre, which I think is more accurate to how I feel about this adaptation, which is, it is not the worst thing that I have ever seen. I will not say that Avatar: The Last Airbender live action is good. It is not, but I also will not say that it is an irredeemable pile of garbage, because it is also not that. There are things to like about this show, and there are things to very rightly criticize, and I lean more towards criticizing it because there's just so many things to go over there, but I do want to also touch on things that I think are positive about this, and not make this review a slog where we just pick apart something that has no qualities to it that you can ever agree with. If you're not familiar with the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender, it can be simply summarized as
water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, the four nations lived together in harmony. Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
I'm not going to get into a lot of the details here because Avatar: The Last Airbender is not a new show, and if you're not familiar with that story, then I'm sorry, this review of the live-action series probably isn't for you. I'm going to make the assumption that if you click this video, you know who the basic characters of Avatar: The Last Airbender are, and the story of Season 1. Going from the original to the live-action adaptation, there is a lot of things that had to change. This adaptation is 8 episodes long, compared to the original Season 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was 20 episodes. Now, the live-action show's episode length is more close to 50 to 60 minutes, so it's an hour long as compared to the original one, which was like 22, 23, something along there, in the 20s, right? So in actual total runtime, the shows are actually pretty similar in length than you would expect. But because live action is such a different medium and live action episodes of a show work in a completely different way, that time cannot be directly compared, because for a live action show, in a lot of ways, scenes and dialogue and action take more time to get right, as opposed to animation, which can be a little snappier, can be a little, suspend your disbelief and not have to set up as much for a lot of its fights, a lot of its action, a lot of its character moments to work. People don't expect animated shows to be like real life. That's not anyone's realistic expectation, because it doesn't even look like real life. It looks like an animated show. And so when you have animated shows, they can do more quicker episodic stories without having to worry as much about the audience following along with them. So in the live action version, there is a lot more condensing down of different plot lines and different stories to kind of meld them into one. One great example of this is Omashu. Omashu is this big Earth Kingdom city that Aang and his friends travel to near the beginning of season 1. In the live action version, they make going to Omashu 2 episodes long, and they fuse like 3 different plot lines directly into it. 3 plot lines that all had to be included, but would feel weird if they were all given their own individual episodes. Or if you gave them 3 episodes, could feel really redundant, because a lot of the things that are happening happen in the other episodes as well, like fighting the Fire Nation or fighting Prince Zuko. Those kind of things, if you have repeated episodes where it's basically the same thing and you're stretching out a 20-minute story into an hour-long piece, that's not going to work that well. So taking all 3 of those stories and melding them into a 2-hour piece, including actually some stories from season 2 where they have like the secret tunnel stuff, that's more of a gag. I don't know if that had to be included, but it was good for filling it out and having that really iconic side story involved in these 2 episodes to get everything out of the way, and filling up and adapting these kind of works into a few episodes. It makes a lot of sense to me why they chose to do that, and the thing I actually do need to commend the writers for this show on is that they are pretty good at condensing things down while still retaining the most important parts of the story of the original, and even adding in scenes that, while I may not agree with all of the things they added, there's definitely a lot of things that they add Azula in here, which I did not think needed to be added. I think she should have been left for season 2, but that's okay. Adding in a lot of things here, other than that I think work really well and help build up those characters, especially scenes between Iroh and Zuko. So in that way that the writers had to restructure the original story to work in a live action setting, I just again need to praise them, because this is really well done and really well thought out outside the first 2 episodes, which feel a little weird pacing wise. And to counter my praise of the writers for this adaptational change, I do need to also take points away because the dialogue is so stiff and so wooden. The world of Avatar: The Last Airbender is incredibly dense and hard to really understand, and the great thing about the original show is you feel like you have so much time to actually explore this world and, be confused by it at first, and then just carried along and learning more and more about it as you go along. Whereas it feels like the adaptation does not have that same confidence, which you can tell because nearly every single character has to deal with long-winded, wooded, expository dialogue that explains the world more directly for viewers who are not familiar with it, which is very, very difficult to deal with, and also very difficult because the interactions between characters also then suffer for that, where they don't feel like they're supposed to have a nice, light, happy bond between the characters, and there is a lot of effort put towards trying to make sure that's clear, that that is supposed to be what they're doing, but the writing just isn't there, and I think the pacing of the acting isn't working either. One of the major flaws I saw in this dynamic, as it was in the show, plays into something that was actually a pretty big talking point all over the place before the show came out. One of the things that bothered me the most before the show came out was the fact that a lot of people got really mad over an article that came out that talked about how they removed a lot of Sokka's sexism from the show because they didn't find it necessary or wanted to tone that aspect down, which is something that I really understand and didn't have a problem with. A lot of people did have a problem with it because a lot of other fans found it to be really foundational to Sokka's character, which I don't. It's only in 3 episodes of the original series and doesn't play that major of a role in the overall story. Sokka's character development in the live action is more focused on what his character development was in the seasons 2 and 3 of the original show, which is more focusing on his arrogance and his inability to trust trust in his own ingenuity. More so than that, the actual character that suffers the most in this adaptation is Katara. Katara, out of all three characters, feels the least like her original self. Katara in the original series is the driving force behind a lot of the stories that the crew goes on, especially early on. The entire inciting incident for Aang being released on the iceberg is based off of Katara getting mad at Sokka. A lot of her agency and major roles played in a number of arcs is flat out removed. One of the biggest actual downsides of the Omashu combination I talked about earlier is that the entire Jet storyline removes any kind of interaction of Katara, Aang, and Sokka having a conflict over whether or not to trust Jet. Because in this version of the story, the only character that's continually around Jet after they find out that he is a freedom fighter is Katara. None of the other two characters even see him outside of initially being introduced to him but not even knowing who he was. He's just some dude who had a cart and helped them get into the city. They have no interaction with them and no conflict with that, so Katara does not have anyone to butt heads against in a lot of situations outside of her fight with Master Pakku when they get to the Northern Water Tribe. But this entire moment loses all of its steam and motivation and anything building up to it because you don't have that full season of Katara having that idealization, having that motivation, and having that kind of drive that pushes a lot of the characters along. She's the person who frees Aang and is one of the key factors of pushing him towards the path of trying to actually fully take on his responsibilities as the Avatar, pushing her brother to believe in himself and to take on roles of leadership, as opposed to in the live action where her entire character does not have a lot of motivations and is for a lot of it just kinda there to either give or receive a lot of the exposition but not perform a role in and of herself, which again comes to how unsatisfactory the writing in this show is. There's a lot to be said about the performances in Avatar: The Last Airbender live action, and I want to be very gentle with a lot of the actors here because I don't think the issues that I'm having are their fault, because I feel like it's so widespread throughout the show and there's a lot of really good, talented actors in this that I don't think it's the fault of the actors themselves, more of the fact the dialogue is so just bland for the most part. So even though the adaptation has built solid bones to try to restructure and reframe the story, it doesn't really work because the dialogue is just so unbearingly difficult to listen to. It's not all on writing though, because directing and editing also play a huge factor in a lot of these performances feeling like they weren't given enough time to breathe, or like the jokes just didn't land appropriately, which I think are probably more on editing than anything else, or directing to not like have something to like lead in a punchline to have like a certain impact, right? The original Avatar: Last Airbender was great at being able to punctuate its jokes, punctuate Sokka's sarcastic humor so perfectly, right? There's a mix of music, sound effects, and timing that all play together to make a joke land, and that is just missing in these, and when so many jokes don't land, it adds up, and you just, it's cringe. There's a lot of moments where this adaptation is cringe, and that is depressing. Getting back to bright spots though, I do want to say that the visuals for the show are genuinely amazing. Like for the most part, incredible. Like if you actually look at the actual special effects that are being done, the actual costuming that's being done, the sets that are not as big as like the sets you even had on like One Piece live action, but there are actual sets that look pretty decent, and there are backgrounds that are done that look really cool, and seeing things reinterpreted into live action just feel like they work and fit, like the Fire Nation ships or the Air Temple or the Northern Water Tribe. These things actually feel like they work in a live action space. Like for an 8-episode Netflix TV show to have effects look this good is really impressive. I need to stress that, and I don't want people to undercut this. This is, for the most part, actually pretty good CGI, especially when it comes to a lot of the bending. There is some times where, especially water bending, doesn't really come across the screen as it did in the animation. I feel like there's more life to things like the water whip in an animated setting than they had in the live action setting. But like the actual overall CGI, like you have to grade this in a realistic curve. This is, for a TV show, pretty damn impressive, because the actual Netflix adaptation believes in the source material's production designs, believes in its costuming, believes in its characters, and it follows through on that. Like if you look at Daniel Day Kim as the Fire Lord, if you look at his scenes, he looks like the Fire Lord. This looks like the Fire Nation throne room. You feel that. This does feel like the world of Avatar. That's great. It's really well done in that sense. That doesn't make up for the writing, and it doesn't make something a good show, but I do want to say that a lot of people on the production side did a lot of work, and I want to say that it paid off. It looks really good, and there are some fight scenes that are genuinely interesting and fun to watch, which is a pretty huge backhanded compliment, I know. It's not great that I'm saying that some of your fight scenes look interesting, but them looking interesting at all is more than what I expected, so, you know, it's an improvement over what my expectation was. I'm just go with that. Now, I'll temper my praise in saying that in some scenes it does look glaringly bad. I'm thinking specifically of one scene where an earthbender holds a boulder over Iroh's head. The whole scene of him pulling up the boulder and putting it over Iroh's, it just looks so fake that you can't really buy into that. But for the most part, it's fine. From a visual standpoint, actually, one of the most glaring problems is compositing, because in a lot of scenes, especially when like the Team Avatar is riding on Appa, they do not look like they're in a real environment. This looks so painfully fake. Or even when scenes when they are just supposed to be like standing in a forest, this doesn't look real at all. It looks so bad. I'm sorry, it doesn't look good. It's like for every positive I have for this show, there's a negative that just counteracts it. Which again just means that I find the show mediocre at best, and I'm kind of surprised with how kind of positive the feedback is, at least from Rotten Tomatoes, and how overwhelmingly negative it is from Twitter. Twitter's response is completely understandable. That was always what was gonna happen. While Rotten Tomatoes is more of a mixed bag and hard to use as like an actual like gauge of if people like it or not, but I mean, it's positive weirdly, so I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. The overall feeling I had a couple episodes in, which persisted the entire way through, is that this show would have been great when I was actually like 12 or 13. Like when I was actually a kid, when I was the target demographic for Avatar: The Last Airbender, if I watched this show, I would enjoy it, because I think a lot of the actual downsides of it is like the dialogue isn't amazing. It doesn't feel the most dynamic or energetic. It is in no way the same caliber of show as the original Avatar: The Last Airbender, but if you put this in front of a kid, it looks pretty decent, and like the characters are pretty well done, and the world looks beautiful for the most part. So like, I think a lot of people will look over the flaws of it and find something that they can really engage with. I think a lot of kids would really like this story and really like the new adaptation they're seeing on Netflix. I think for a new audience, this is something that they could really enjoy. So in that way, it is successful, because that is the show's target demographic. For adults like myself who were there when the original show was coming out, this show isn't really meant for us, it feels like. And that's okay. Like, I'm fine with that. It's not going to change the fact that I think this is a subpar show in a lot of ways. That's not gonna change. I'm still gonna give my honest opinion on that. But I do think that it's something that if you gave it to a kid who had not watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, or maybe has watched it and wants some more of it, I think they'd have fun with this adaptation. It is not the best it could possibly be, but it is far from the worst that I was expecting. Overall, those are my thoughts on the adaptation. I think this is a show that I'm gonna call mediocre. I feel like it's bad, but I feel like it does have the audience that would genuinely enjoy it, and seems to be genuinely enjoying it if I'm going to believe any of the Rotten Tomatoes scores. It is far from the worst live-action adaptation I have ever seen, and I will watch season 2 when it comes out. I'm sure they're gonna do a season 2 still. I'll watch it. I will probably not enjoy it that much, but I want to see what they do. It's interesting seeing how they develop and change and maybe improve on what they did here, so genuinely interested to see what comes next. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to see videos similar to this, then be sure to subscribe. I have plenty of videos, more so on anime, but also on other live action adaptations that I do weekly now, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much again for watching this video. Be sure to like, be sure to comment your own thoughts on the series, and be sure to subscribe for more videos similar to this. I want to thank you all for watching again. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day, a great night, or whatever it is you're having. And stay rad.